Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world here in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. The second Trump administration's national security strategy marks a sharp turn in how Washington, D.C. talks about power, allies, and especially Taiwan, explicitly tying the island's semiconductor dominance and geography in the first and second island chains to the U.S. economic security and the need to preserve military overmatch. Against this backdrop, President Lai's higher defense budgets, debates over arms sales and delivery delays, and intensifying PLA gray zone pressure have put Taiwan's deterrence posture under unprecedented scrutiny in both Taipei and DC. Today, in our conversation with Randy Schriver, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs and now Vice Chair of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, helps unpack what Trump 2.0 really means for U.S. global posture, whether Taiwan risks becoming a bargaining chip, and what concrete choices Washington and Taipei must make by 2030 to keep the peace in the Taiwan Strait. So welcome, Randy.
Thank you.
So great to have you today with us. The New York Times editorial board recently published several alarming articles, basically claiming that the U.S. military could be overmatched by China. As a longtime observer and analyst of Chinese, especially PLA, capabilities and Taiwan cross-strait relations and the Indo-Pacific in general, what is your view?
There is reason for concern. China's obviously been making significant investments in its military. It's been operating in more aggressive ways and robust operations around Taiwan, so there's a lot to be concerned about. Also, for the United States, this is always an away game. We're always reliant on others for their willingness to provide us access and their willingness to allow us to base out of these forward deployed positions. So there's a lot to be concerned about.
I recall even 15, 20 years ago, you have cautioned that the PLA is developing fast. I think 2049 is the year that you somehow set as a benchmark?
Well, we don't set the benchmark. Xi Jinping said 2049 is the year of great national rejuvenization, or accomplish it by then. And he's also said that what they call reunification with Taiwan is a part of that project. Mm-hmm. So we listen to them, and Xi Jinping has also said he wants the PLA to be prepared by 2027. Right. So be ready by, not a go date, but these are benchmarks that they're setting for themselves, and we need to take them seriously and take them at their word.
That was like years ago, and it didn't feel like Washington took notice until more recently. Why do you think that's the case? And also, are they moving faster than the U.S. and Washington has anticipated?
I think people were slow to react because China's been very careful in what they call the gray zone and making sort of incremental steps to increase the pressure on Taiwan. So staying below the threshold of what might warrant a more robust response is an art they've almost perfected. That, of course, changed after fall 2022 and the visit to Taiwan of then Speaker Nancy Pelosi. I supported her visit, but the fact of the matter is the Chinese really ramped up military pressure after that. So that got people's attention. They've also hardened the laws. China's not a rule of law country, rule by law, but they've definitely put Taiwan in their sights more. So there's quite a bit going on that leads us to raise awareness, concern, and think about how we respond smartly.
Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, saying, in every war game, the U.S. loses to China. Now, that was before he became Secretary of War. So how much should we take that seriously?
I say Secretary of Defense, by the way. I work for the U.S. Congress, and we still authorize it as the Department of Defense. Look, I think he's right to point out that there are trends that are very difficult for the United States in a Taiwan contingency. The way wargaming works, usually everything goes right for red and blue gets a lot of problems thrown at them. So it's okay if you lose in wargaming, as long as you're learning from it and you're developing counter capabilities. I think the big unknowns, though, that remain is, this is a military that hasn't seen combat since 1979. And Taiwan is not an easy target. 80 nautical miles of water, mountainous, inhospitable terrain, unfavorable sea conditions for most of the year, very few ports favorable for embarkation. Again, for a military that hasn't fought since 1979. So there's some unknowns in there in terms of how well the PLA would actually perform in the fog of war.
And related to that is how the U.S. views China's capability. And in the latest national security strategy, it's interesting that the Trump administration did not frame China as a threat, unlike the Biden administration even. And so how do you interpret that?
Well, that's one mind I have difficulty crawling into and understanding completely. I would point out that the national security strategy, though very important, is really a part of a collection of things, statements, speeches, articles, and other ways that the administration has signaled their intentions. And it looks to me like there is serious interest in deterring China, in maintaining the status quo or better.
Which is consistent with the past.
Yes.
Right.
And if you want to look at the national security strategy in detail, there are some positive things. Taiwan is recognized as a place of value to the United States in the Indo-Pacific, not just for semiconductors, but for its geography. It separates the theaters of Northeast and Southeast Asia.
And the language of that, I thought it was interesting. And I don't recall, I could be wrong, that the U.S. spelled it out so explicitly in terms of China's military and geographic strategic interest to the U.S.
Yeah.
Does that say anything about how the U.S. views Taiwan? Or, I mean, it feels like it's a core interest.
I think it does. When you talk about Taiwan being adjacent to the South China Sea and the amount of commerce that flows through there, you talk about Taiwan's geography and its place in the first island chain as an opening, potentially to the second island chain if it were to fall into CCP hands. So there's a lot there to say that Taiwan is an important place.
So what has changed in terms of the view of Taiwan? Because if you just look at the document, it feels like it's quite consistent. Taiwan's importance hasn't diminished. However, if you follow news, there's been news reports about how President Trump potentially treating Taiwan as a bargaining chip.
Well, when you're 23 million people opposed by 1.4 billion, 80 nautical miles away, you worry about different scenarios and different things the U.S. administration might do, but I take him at their word. He signed the national security strategy, so he owns that strategy. He owns that language about how Taiwan is important to us, not just for semiconductors, but geography and the rest. There's also a lot of discussion about allies and partners in there. And I think one thing that I sense is a bit different is the president looks at those alliances as mutually beneficial relationships. I think in the first term there was a tendency for him to see allies sometimes as burdens, as underperforming in terms of their defense spending, underperforming in terms of burden sharing. This time he's talking about shipbuilding cooperation, he's talking about critical minerals, rare earth cooperation. He is saying things that the United States needs these alliances and partnerships for our own interests. And so I think that's a good sign.
I would categorize you as a more traditionalist and who really cares about U.S. leadership in the world. And you were in the Bush administration as well, the junior Bush administration, and also in the first Trump administration. So with the changing world order, how do you see the U.S. leadership changing? Or not? I mean, some people would go that far to say he's an isolationist. Some try to say he's not really, he's just trying to concentrate our efforts in certain priorities. Where do you think the U.S. should be?
As you said, I'm more in the traditional conservative camp. I think American leadership is important. I think it's not only helpful to partners and allies who share our values and share our views and interests, it's important for us to be proactive in helping shape the geopolitical landscape. But to return to President Trump, I think a lot of people try to put coherence around some sort of framework or ideology that he may or may not hold. And I would say that includes MAGA, America First. They try to say this is what he's about. But then they have a lot of difficulty explaining he bombed Iran. He conducted a strike against the Houthis. So I think President Trump is not really constrained by a coherent ideology. A lot of it is sort of by the gut and instinctual. I do think, I take him at his word that he wants to be the president known for peacemaking, not for war. I saw that firsthand when I served in the first term of the Trump administration and was involved in the Afghanistan negotiations. That had a very tragic ending, but what drove a lot of that was the president wanted out of this war that we'd been in for almost 20 years at that point. I think when you look at how he approaches Ukraine, how he approaches Israel, Gaza, and the Palestinian problem there, his instinct is to try to end conflict. I take him at his word at that.
What about the tensions across Taiwan Strait? That is probably one of the biggest ones in the world, and he hasn't really expressed his thoughts around that issue.
Well, I think he has. He signed the national security strategy. We hear about conversations he might have had also, but I think he signed something, he owns it. And so I think what we've heard from the administration and the NSS in the Shangri-La speech that Secretary Hegseth gave, other statements, we see that Taiwan is valued and it is viewed as important. And that's what I'll hold them to the extent as a think tank person, as an advisor to Congress. I think holding them to those words is what we need to do.
Well, we also see Taiwan increasing defense budget, which some would say is due to U.S. pressure and its own domestic needs. And how do you think about Taiwan building up its deterrence?
I think these are very important initiatives. I think the special budget is a very significant increase in spending if it passes. Even if it passes in part, it's a very large proposals. I'm not as expert in Taiwan domestic politics, but I'm hearing optimistic views coming from the government. They do think that they can peel off some opposition lawmakers who have a strong record of pro-defense issues in Taiwan. So that's really the key, is can they peel a couple off?
Some of the opposition's hesitation around passing such a big defense budget, or even just the past defense budget. And so what needs to improve more than just arms purchases, like large numbers?
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find me on the record saying Taiwan needs to spend a certain percent of GDP or spend this amount. I look more at what they spend on rather than the gross amount. Obviously, increasing defense spending in a resource-constrained environment is potentially helpful. They still got to buy the right things. For Taiwan, it's complicated because there's D-Day and there's every day. So they've been investing in so-called asymmetric capabilities for the counter-invasion capabilities. But they've got to deal with coercion and the gray zone too. So I think some mix of manned and unmanned capabilities along with autonomous or semi-autonomous capabilities, I think all of that needs to be in play because China's always going to outmass Taiwan. It's just huge, and it's putting a lot of muscle into its defense industries and building out capabilities to coerce Taiwan. So responding to that is going to have to be some mix of cheaper, more durable, more resilient capabilities.
Beyond defense and military concerns, what are the other gray zone tactics that concern you?
Certainly the information operations, the spread of disinformation in Taiwan and among allies and partners, and even in the United States. I think the center of gravity in this fight is the will of the people of Taiwan and the morale and the attitude of the people of Taiwan. If they don't want to resist, then China's job will be easier. They can get capitulation without using force. If there's a will to resist, and there's a lot that goes into that, I think China's got a different problem on its hands, a much more difficult one. So I think combating disinformation, having objective truth out there when China is actively trying to skew opinions is really important.
I don't know if you followed that. They recently banned Xiaohongshu, the Little Red Book. There's obviously a debate about, does this infringe on freedom of speech issue? I mean, it's not that different from what's happening in the United States when it comes to those debates. And what is your view?
Well, I think Taiwan is an amazing success story, partly because it has championed democracy and freedoms and freedom of speech. So, I think these things should be done with a lot of, forethought and weighing the costs and benefits. Look, I mean, certain books, you shouldn't publish Mein Kampf in Germany, right? So the Little Red Book is something that is extraordinarily offensive to people in Taiwan and should be.
Right.
So I won't necessarily give you an opinion on banning or not banning, but I understand the impulse there to do it. The real challenging things are not, the little red book, in my opinion. It's the daily intrusions into social media, the daily intrusions even into traditional media that are really meant to skew the impressions of the people of Taiwan, view China in a more favorable light, put the United States as an unreliable partner, have U.S. hollowing out Taiwan's industry and core capabilities. All of these things are potentially very damaging.
Yeah, you talk about building up Taiwanese will to fight. There's an effort coming from the government, whole of society kind of defense and resilience. And what is your view of that? Some people worry that it may overly militarize Taiwanese society.
Spending a lot of time there, I don't see that it's going to overly militarize. I mean, I think somebody having information about where they could take shelter in the event of missile attacks or natural disaster for that matter.
Right.
People having information about first responders in their local communities. I mean, these are all very sort of basic things that do contribute to resilience, and none of that really leads to militarization. Now, there are opportunities if people want to take up some basic training, some arms training and things of that nature. That's all on a voluntary basis.
Yeah.
And I think that's appropriate as well.
Well, beyond Taiwan, and Taiwan can't fight this alone, clearly, even though there's no clear commitment coming from the US or other countries, but building alliance, right, around it is very important. And so there's like proposal of even an Asia NATO idea, somehow Taiwan can be an observer of other types of security, alliance or network. Do you think that's possible? And would that be viewed as provocation to China?
It is possible, and it would be viewed as a provocation from China. I think a lot of that at this stage should be behind closed doors and part of private, quiet efforts. Look how much trouble the Japanese seemed to get in when Prime Minister Takaichi made the comments about a survival threatening situation, which I believe she spoke correctly. And I believe in response to a member of the opposition in the Diet, she really had to respond the way she did. But nonetheless, the Chinese will react to even slight provocations, what they view as provocations. So imagine more advanced planning of Taiwanese dispersal of F-16s into Japan's Southwest Island chain. All of those things would be highly provocative from Beijing's perspective. So, the discussions at this juncture, I think, need to be private, behind closed doors, but I think they should happen.
Well, you're also a Japan security expert. So with the new leadership in Japan, as well as just the recent bantering between China and Japan, are you worried that tensions might continue to escalate?
We don't want to see conflict between China and Japan, for sure. But the things that Japan is doing is, I think, all moving in the right direction. So raising their defense spending.
So you do believe Japan should also increase its own defense?
It doesn't matter what I think. They are.
Okay,
They've committed to doubling it. They said originally 5 years. They're going to do it in 3 years. And Prime Minister Takaichi has said that that's a floor, not a ceiling. She's going to continue to seek larger expenditures for defense. They've obviously reinterpreted the Constitution in Article 9 to say that they can engage in collective self-defense. They've introduced counter-strike capabilities, which to the untrained eye looks a lot like strike capabilities, because of course they can be used in an offensive type campaign. They've developed the Southwest Island chain for greater military access, and we're exercising out of there. Those are the islands with the greatest proximity to Taiwan. So Yonaguni is the closest foreign held territory to Taiwan. Japan and the Philippines are both quite close. So all of these things are quite positive, which is why, frankly, I think the Chinese responded so harshly to Prime Minister Takaichi's statement. It's not the statement, it's everything in totality that they're doing that has them concerned.
So as the vice chair of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which is a very important entity that monitors a lot of sort of thinking about U.S.-China strategic rivalry, and there's an annual report that just came out. Can you share some of the key findings?
Well, as related to Taiwan, there's 3 specific recommendations. One is we want Taiwan to have the ability to contribute to U.S. force posture initiatives. So opening up, for example, a foreign military sales case that's not for weapons, not for training, but they can pay into a fund that the U.S. could then turn around and use for development of ectosites in Philippines, in northern Luzon, again, Yonaguni Island, Southwest Island chain. It would be a fund that could then be used to hire either local U.S. or perhaps even Taiwan companies. Some of it is just pouring cement, and some of it is developing airfields. Some of it is developing warehouse facilities for the storage of military equipment, so on and so forth. So these sites are largely about deterrence and defense of Taiwan. So why shouldn't Taiwan contribute to that? That's the idea behind that recommendation. We also have a recommendation that we refer to as show your homework. You probably know the Taiwan Relations Act not only says sell weapons of a defensive character to Taiwan, it also says the U.S. has to maintain the capacity to resist force. To our knowledge, Pacific Command, Indo-PACOM has never been asked to prove it. So go to Congress in both a classified and unclassified setting and say, here's why we are confident we have the capacity to resist force. We have the capabilities, we have the plan. We can deal in an environment of opportunistic aggression elsewhere. If there's a Taiwan constraint contingency and North Korea makes a move or Russia makes a move. And if they can't prove it convincingly, they should identify where the gaps are and how the Congress can then step in and provide more resources or support. We did have a third recommendation that is not on the security side, but relates to the Vatican and Taiwan's relationship there, encouraging that relationship to maintain and be sustained in an official capacity. I guess some might call this the do as we say, not as we do, since we broke relations with the ROC in 1979. But we think that that's an important relationship for Taiwan's international standing. We think it would be a mistake if the Vatican were to make a switch to mainland China.
Do you see that coming?
Well, every new pope takes a look at this. And why wouldn't he do that, given that there's 1.4 billion souls potentially to save? It's very attractive to Catholic Church, but also other religious affiliations. They usually run into certain roadblocks, like the Chinese not allowing the Vatican to choose bishops in China. Certainly the jailing of Cardinal Zen in Hong Kong is not helpful. But most popes early on will take a look at this. So we thought it was important to put the recommendation in the report this year, since Pope Leo is still pretty new.
I think you, as a longtime Taiwan supporter and probably one of the strongest supporters since early days when Taiwan wasn't even a topic of interest most people's mind. You've shown your commitment and friendship to Taiwan. So thank you so much. I think our Congress is very lucky to have you continue advising them to make sure, even with all these major changes in this administration, that we continue to have certain voice and force supporting Taiwan. So thank you, Randy, as always.
Thank you. I feel I need to hasten to add, I do like Taiwan. I have an affinity for the place. I really enjoy the people visiting there. But I don't do what I do because I like Taiwan. It's for U.S. interests. And I think it's important for the United States to have a strong, capable Taiwan in its de facto independent status or better. And so we'll keep working at it from whatever perch we're in.
I think that's probably the most compelling argument here in Washington. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Season 2 of DC Insiders by Taiwan Plus. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. From U.S.-China competition under Trump 2.0, U.S.-Taiwan trade and technology ties, growing tensions between Japan and China, and supply chain security undersea cables to U.S. military assistance. Each episode discusses a timely issue and unpacks both the DC debate and what it means concretely for Taiwan's security, economy, and international status. We aim to elevate Taiwan's voice in global policy discussions at a moment when the island nation sits at the center of great power rivalry, but is often spoken about rather than heard from. By situating Taiwan's challenges inside broader conversations on technology competition, semiconductors, rare earths, alliance politics, and great power competition, DC Insiders helps our global audiences see Taiwan not just as a flashpoint, but as a proactive partner shaping regional and global outcomes. This season on DC Insiders, Conversations from Washington traced how decisions made in the US Capitol are reshaping Taiwan's future. Across episodes, policymakers and think tank scholars offer listeners sharper, more nuanced views on why Taiwan sits at the heart of today's most consequential geopolitical debates. Our guests, representing a broad range of viewpoints, provided balanced perspectives for your informed understanding. What's the outcome of the US-Taiwan trade negotiation? How will the war between Ukraine and Russia end, and how will that impact global politics? Will Trump visit China in April 2026? Will NVIDIA be able to sell more advanced chips to China, and will China accept them? On behalf of the entire Taiwan Plus team, thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media for the full Season 2 and Season 1. We welcome your feedback and look forward to bringing you even better content and conversations. See you again soon.